They thought they understood life. Across hundreds of systems, the Xyra species had cataloged everything that crawled, flew, or bled. They conquered entire biospheres without breaking a sweat. To them, life was formulaic, structured, predictable, and ultimately controllable. So when they captured their first human, they didn't expect anything unusual. Another carbon-based biped, just slightly more aggressive than most. Containment was effortless. Sedation, standard. Dissection, routine. Until it wasn't. The first red flag appeared 4 minutes into procedure. The human's heart had stopped. They confirmed it with 3 scans, but something still moved. Muscle fibers twitched. Nerve endings fired. The body was resisting. Not reacting, resisting. Like it didn't get the memo that it was supposed to be dead. They increased the neural inhibitors. The twitching stopped for about 20 seconds. Then the human's eyes opened, wide, focused, conscious. Every instrument in the chamber triggered alerts. The oxygen levels dropped. The heart rate spiked to lethal levels, then stabilized as if nothing had happened. A tech reached for a containment field. The human locked eyes with him and smiled. Not out of joy, but defiance. It said, "Without words, I know what you're doing. I know what you are." That technician collapsed moments later, convulsing. Later analysis showed he wasn't poisoned. He wasn't even touched. His own immune system had turned on itself. Overwhelmed by unfamiliar proteins released by the human's blood, they had worn protective suits. It didn't matter. Something about the human body communicated danger biologically, a kind of chemical aggression none of their science had ever encountered. Another attempt at analysis revealed that the human's blood wasn't just carrying oxygen. It was loaded with dormant pathogens, tailored antibodies, microscopic entities the researchers couldn't even identify. One sample, when isolated, began altering its genetic structure in real time to match the surrounding medium. It wasn't just adaptive. It was reactive, alive in ways their most complex simulations couldn't replicate. They tried to extract organ tissue. The scalpel shattered. Reinforced alloy snapped like brittle glass. The tissue hardened momentarily, almost as if aware of the incision attempt. Cellular memory? Defensive protein spike? The lead biologist refused to speculate. He simply locked the chamber and activated the sterilization protocol. Too late. The human vanished from the chamber 5 hours later. No alarms. No broken doors. Just gone. And on the wall, written in its own dried blood, a message. Don't dig where you can't survive. The Xyrath immediately classified human biology as level 7 anomalous. Dissection was forbidden. Capture protocols were revised. No physical contact. No exposure to fluids. No assumptions of death. The memo circulated across 50 systems. Human physiology is not fully compatible with known biological laws. Recommend observation only. No invasive study. But the damage had already been done, because the question had taken root in their minds. If this was the first human they encountered, what else was waiting out there? And more importantly, what kind of species builds a body that fights back? They called it the war containment. The Xyra deployed over 100 fleets, confident in their tactical supremacy. Their AI-driven strategy models predicted full human capitulation within 6 months. But by month 2, the models had already failed. Human resistance didn't just continue, it intensified. Not because of superior weapons, not because of numbers, because humans wouldn't stay dead. Reports flooded in from every front. Soldiers shot through the chest, standing back up minutes later, bleeding and furious. Troopers caught in blast zones, emerging with half-melted armor and third-degree burns, still dragging themselves forward. One Xyrath captain detailed an encounter where a human pilot ejected into open space with no suit. He was found 12 minutes later, frostbitten and barely conscious, but alive. When asked how, he muttered one word: adrenaline. Commanders began to notice a disturbing trend. Standard battlefield tactics, ambush, attrition, shock and awe, were losing effectiveness. Humans adapted too quickly. They learned pain like it was a language. Injuries that would incapacitate other species only made them more reckless. Some even used their own blood as weapons, infecting, distracting, intimidating. One alien medic described it best. They bleed like it's a warning. More troubling were the resurrection stories. A unit declared dead after orbital bombardment reappeared days later. Not a ghost, not a transmission, physically present. No functioning supplies, no food, no water, just grit and the kind of biology that refused to quit. Autopsy logs became useless. Cause of death became a joke. If a human wasn't decapitated or vaporized, you had to assume they'd stand back up. In desperation, the Zyrith tried containment tactics, incineration, sealing bodies in vacuum chambers. Still, there were failures. One facility reported that a corpse moved during transport. Another claimed a dismembered arm tried to reach for a weapon. By now, morale had cratered. Troops refused to retrieve fallen humans. Recovery orders were often ignored. Disobedience became routine, not out of cowardice, but out of logic. You didn't poke something that refused to die. Soon, standard engagement rules were rewritten. Never engage unless absolutely necessary. Do not recover human bodies. Do not attempt capture. Avoid close combat at all costs. Burn entire areas if needed. Above all, never assume it's over. If they stop moving, that's not confirmation. That's just the beginning of something worse. One intercepted human transmission explained everything in a single phrase. Pain is just a request, not a command. That phrase haunted the enemy. It wasn't a boast. It was an explanation, a biological manifesto. Human bodies weren't just surviving, they were responding. Threats made them stronger. Damage made them faster. Death became optional. Desire began to understand that this wasn't a species built for peace. It wasn't even built for victory. It was built for one thing only: continuation, no matter the cost, no matter the damage, no matter the logic. You could defeat a strategy. You could outgun a fleet. But how do you defeat something that keeps getting up? How do you fight biology that considers death an inconvenience? They stopped calling it a war. You can't wage war against a contagion. You contain it. You isolate it. You pray it doesn't mutate. That's what humanity became to the galaxy, a biological anomaly wrapped in myth and fear. The term human was removed from diplomatic databases and replaced with a cautionary classification. Tier Z hostile biology, contact prohibited, communication forbidden, study punishable by planetary sanction. But fear breeds curiosity, and curiosity demands answers. Why were humans like this? Why did their bodies disobey natural law? Some suspected they weren't a natural species at all. Theories spread like spores. A failed weapon created by an extinct race, a product of runaway evolution, a planetary defense system wearing skin. One scholar proposed that Earth itself was a kind of intelligent petri dish, and humans were its immune response. She disappeared 2 weeks later. Not killed, erased. Artifacts of human physiology were banned, but black markets thrived. Samples smuggled across borders. A drop of blood sold for the price of a frigate. Labs went dark trying to decode its shifting genome. One sample reportedly built its own defense mechanisms inside a containment tank. When exposed to radiation, it didn't die. It adapted, then consumed the tank walls. Another grew muscle tissue in a vacuum. Another stayed dormant for months, then triggered a psychic scream across 2 light years. The fear mutated. Entire cultures began to treat humanity like a curse. Not just dangerous, corruptive. Contact with them warped systems, altered environments, changed minds. One Zyrith engineer claimed his dreams began speaking in Terran languages after handling a preserved femur. He self-terminated within a week. His autopsy revealed neural reconfiguration. He had grown human-like synapses. Religions formed. Some declare humans as divine punishment, flesh-wrapped consequences for galactic arrogance. Others whispered that humans were proof the universe wasn't random. Something had shaped them to survive everything. And if that was true, then extinction wasn't their fear. It was their function. Even their technology wasn't safe. Reverse-engineered Terran devices contained organometallic hybrids, machines that bled when damaged circuits that healed over time. One probe, half melted in atmosphere reentry, rebooted itself and rebuilt using local biomass. A living drone, autonomous, unstoppable, designed by evolution, not engineers. The most terrifying realization came not from a battlefield or a lab, but a translation, a captured Terran document, half military, half philosophical, outlined a concept called biological liberty. It claimed that freedom was tied not to thought or law, but to adaptation. To be free was to never remain static, never accept limitation, to grow through trauma, to learn from injury, to rewrite yourself until nothing could chain you down, not even your own DNA. That document was declared a Class A mimetic hazard, because deep down they understood something horrifying. Humans didn't evolve for peace. They didn't evolve for conquest. They evolved to outlive everything. And the worst part? It was working. They stopped trying to understand. Understanding wasn't the problem. They knew what humanity was now. What they had to face was a reality. Humans had transcended biology itself. Earth, that tiny blue, had become a force of nature, not just a planet, but a living, breathing entity in its own right. Ascension so complex that even the galaxies couldn't grasp its full implications. And no one had been prepared for what came next. When the Zyra fleet approached Earth, they weren't just bringing warships. They were carrying fear. The message had been clear for decades. Earth was off limits. No species dared to tread near it. No one dared even study the planet's location without permission. But the Zyrith had already grown impatient. They underestimated the human resolve. And they underestimated the consequences of provoking a species that had learned to outlive. The moment they crossed the threshold into Earth's orbit, they knew something was wrong. A subtle shift in the space-time fabric. A distortion. Communications began to fail. Ships started malfunctioning. Artificial intelligence systems, so reliant on precision and logic, began to glitch, producing hallucinations, noise, erratic data. The fleet's navigational systems distorted, pulling ships off course, throwing them into a cosmic void. They tried to compensate, but every calculation betrayed them. The deeper they went into the system, the more systems began to fail. Was it a natural phenomenon? An anomaly? No, it was Earth. Then they discovered the truth. Earth wasn't just alive, it was aware. The planet itself had become the immune system of the galaxy. Every human being, every piece of Terran biology, was now part of an ever-evolving collective defense. The moment a hostile force entered the solar system, Earth itself reacted. The ships that attempted to land on the planet's surface were not just repelled, they were infected. Not by disease, not by bacteria, but by an evolutionary response so swift, so alien, that nothing in the galaxy could prepare for it. The Zyra ships were the first to feel it. Biological sensors that had once been pristine now began to detect human DNA everywhere. But it wasn't just human DNA. It was an altered form, a version of themselves, but better. Engines sputtered and hulls weakened. Biological viruses began to replicate at frightening speed within the ship systems, breaking down their shields, short-circuiting electronics, even altering their own genetic code. The Zyrith, who prided themselves on perfect biology, were now fighting against a force they could not comprehend. Then came the final horror. When they tried to retreat, Earth's defenses grew stronger. Systems they hadn't even detected began to weaponize their atmosphere, sending waves of radiation that twisted their molecular structure. Their ship's very biology began to reject them. Internal fluids turned corrosive. Even the crew began to experience changes, muscle growth, heightened senses, uncontrollable growth of new tissues. The Zyra had been altered, infected by Earth itself. Their perfectly engineered forms were no match for what humanity had become. And Earth had only just begun. Humanity had grown beyond its own limitations. The planet had evolved, not just as a world, but as a being, an ecosystem so advanced, so adaptable, that it could no longer be destroyed, contained, or understood by any other species. It was a biological weapon, a living defense mechanism, a force of nature, and it would no longer allow anyone to threaten its existence. The Zyrith fleet fled, not because they had lost a battle, not because of weaponry or tactics. They fled because they realized Earth wasn't just a planet anymore. It was a warning. And in that moment, the galaxy knew the truth. Humanity was not a species to be studied, contained, or destroyed. It was a force of nature that would outlive everything. It had learned to survive death itself, and now it would ensure that no one ever would threaten its home again.